Hello, in this video we'll continue working on the initial task and we'll implement an Avro-powered consumer for our user activity topic. To get started, we'll create a new package called Kafka, and in here we'll add a consumer class, which will be a Spring Boot component, and we'll declare a Kafka listener for our topic. Next, we want our listener to accept a consumer record type object that expects string type keys and generic record type values. Generic record is an Avro-specific interface that can be used to represent any sort of Avro-encoded payload. As far as our consumer logic goes, let's just print our message. We also have to update our application configuration and use the Kafka Avro deserializer, the deserialization equivalent of what we use to serialize messages. Let's run this application now. Our runner will be triggered and produce a record to user activity. On the other side, the consumer reads it and logs it. Nice. The entire bit that is specific to Avro happens in a similar fashion to what we discussed on the producer side, with all the schema registry communication being done inside the Kafka Avro deserializer. Our Avro encoded user activity events will contain, embedded in them, the schema ID. The deserializer will fetch that schema from the registry and will be able to deserialize the payload. Then it will store that information in this generic record container object. If we look at the generic record interface definition, it has put and get methods, similar to a map. That is how it represents the payload that it stores, using string keys for the field names and object values for the field values. We can go back to our Kafka listener, and inside it we can access our user activity event fields with get, and we'll rerun the app to see it in action. This is all very nice, but what if we want to use the POJO that we generated in the last video in our consumer? Well, that is very similar, we just use our Avro model here. Let's also update the logging bits to use our class getters. And we'll let our application know that we want to use specific records instead of generic ones by using the specific Avro reader flag under consumer properties. Everything is set up, so let's run it. And here's our logs. Now that you know both approaches, specific and generic records, which ones should you use for your applications? With Avro-specific records, you get the usual strongly typed approach benefits, because you just have distinct Java classes for your Avro schemas. These classes provide type safety and compile time checks, allowing you to catch errors before your application even runs. They also enable a more intuitive programming experience, because you get auto-completion and they facilitate refactoring. However, for specific records, each schema change requires code regeneration, recompilation, and redeployment, which can become burdensome in rapidly evolving systems. They are also less flexible if you need to handle many different schemas at once. So if you want to reuse a consumer to read from multiple topics or just multiple types of data, this is probably not the way to go. On the other hand, generic record offers a dynamic schema-agnostic approach that provides flexibility at the cost of type safety. They incur less initial overhead since no code generation is required for your data models. Also, they are able to handle multiple or evolving schemas more dynamically. The benefits come at the cost of losing compile time checks and having to push error detection to runtime, which means you might encounter more unexpected failures during execution. In a real-world application, if you have well-defined, relatively stable schemas and you're working with homogeneous sets of messages, you'll likely stick with specific records. If your system needs to deal with many different event types or you don't want to regenerate your classes each time a schema changes, then generic record might be the way to go. And with that, you now understand not only how Avro works, but how it's integrated in Spring Kafka from producing to consuming it. Well done! I'll see you in the next video.